The year 1066 would be one of war, one of bloodshed across England, a year that would change the course of English history forever. It started on January 5th with the passing of the Anglo-Saxon King Edward the Confessor. Following his death, the Earl of Wessex, Harold Godwinson, rushed to London and usurped the crown. Harold was able to secure the loyalty of most of the earls, but his claim was challenged by his brother Tostig Godwinson, who would seek the aid of Norwegian King Harald Hardrada. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, Duke William of Normandy had openly declared his intent on the English throne. These two parties both raised their armies and set sail for England, with their eyes on the crown. King Harald Hardrada of Norway had set sail with an estimated 300 ships and an estimated 15,000 men. The majority of his men were from Norway, but he picked up more soldiers at the Viking earldom of Orkney in Scotland, as well as Tostig Godwinson, brother of King England, and his small group of rebel supporters. They arrived at the River Ouse, and using their longships were able to move up the waterways towards Yorkshire, where they disembarked to continue the advance on York by foot. On the 20th of September 1066, the Norsemen were confronted by the English near the village of Fulford. The English army was really two armies being led by Edwin, Earl of Mercia, and his brother Morcar, Earl of Northumbria. The English had spread their lines along the stream Germany Beck, their flanks secured by the River Ouse. Morcar and his Northumbrian army were set in the center and left flank, while Edwin and his Mercian army were set on the right flank next to the river. Across the Germany Beck, Tostig and the Jarls of Orkney began to deploy their forward troops to oppose the Northumbrians, while Harald Hardrada began moving his elite troops onto their left flank, staying close to the River Ouse and concealing many of his men. However, this was only half of the army. The rest of Harald Hardrada's army were still marching from Rickall, where the longboats had been left with guards. The English could see the invading army was not yet fully deployed. Morcar took advantage of this and advanced his Northumbrian troops across the stream and into the weaker center line of the Norwegians. The English advance made progress against the Norwegians, pushing them steadily backwards. However, the Norwegian reinforcements were arriving and helped to fortify the weakened center line. The English advance was slowed, then halted altogether. They fought on like this for many more hours, the lines of battle moving back and forth with each surge of fresh men. Meanwhile, Harald Hardrada had kept his elite troops out of combat. He was waiting for the stream to subside with the tide. Edwin, Earl of Mercia, who was directly across the stream from Harald Hardrada, had stationed himself and the majority of his soldiers on a hill back from the stream to observe the fighting. He left the stream poorly guarded, believing that the banks of the stream and the depth of the stream would be too hard to cross this close to the River Ouse. He was wrong. Harald Hardrada led his best warriors across the stream as it subsided around midday, his troops easily overwhelming the few English that had been left to guard the stream. The rest of the Norwegian flank followed eagerly, and they advanced on Edwin's position upon his hill. Edwin initially held his position upon the hill. He watched as his soldiers were cut down by the very best warriors Hardrada had assembled for this purpose. The Mercian shield wall was smashed, and the Norwegians continued to advance steadily towards him. Losing his nerve, Edwin ordered a retreat back to York. His thanes and reserves escaped mostly unharmed, but many who tried fleeing from the front lines were cut down. Now it was time for Harold Hardrada to finish his plan. Back along the Germany Beck, the Northumbrians in the Norwegian center had been fighting along the stream for most of the day. Both sides had sustained heavy casualties. The Norwegians, however, had begun to push the English back into the Germany Beck, and at some spots had even crossed it themselves. The shield walls of both armies had been broken in many spots, and the fighting was devolving into a vicious brawl. It was unclear who was to win the center. The Norwegian army had rallied with their reinforcements and pushed back the advance of the English. But the English still fought bravely and desperately to keep the Norsemen from crossing onto their side of the stream. It was then, as the fighting seemed most desperate, that Harold Hardrada arrived from the English side of the stream and hit the Northumbrian army in the rear and the flank, pincering them against the stream. Trapped between the stream with the men led by Tostig and the fierce warriors of Harold Hardrada, the Northumbrian army was decimated. Many of the English tried to flee with the onslaught into the marshes. Most of them were cut down as they ran, but some of them did manage to escape, including Morcar, the Earl of Northumbria. This signaled the end of the Battle of Fulford. Harold Hardrada had won a hard-fought victory against the English, using solid tactics, knowledge of the tides, and fierce Norse warriors. York was later surrendered to him on the condition that he would not force entry into the city. His men began to set up winter camps at Stamford Bridge and at the town of Rickall, where the longships had been stored. They had managed to defeat the prominent armies of the north, and Hardrada was not overly worried about the King Harold of England, or his men so far south in Wessex, who were preparing for the invasion of the Normans. Harold Hardrada would rue this decision, though. King Harold had heard of the Norwegians' invasion in the north, and believed the Normans would not cross the English Channel with winter approaching so swiftly, so he abandoned his position guarding the southern coast of England and marched his army swiftly up the length of England to confront Harold Hardrada and his brother, Tostig Godwinson. King Harold Godwinson, King of England, and his Wessex troops would arrive in the north and would confront King Harold Hardrada of Norway and his brother Tostig Godwinson at what is now called the Battle of Stamford Bridge.